Right now, it is my distinct honor to introduce Martha Sapp, the director of the New Jersey Green Acres program. Martha has been with Green Acres for 36 years, serving as director for since 2012. She started off as a project manager, worked her way up to the director. Martha's here to talk about the statewide comprehensive outdoor recreation plan. I was very happy to be able to sit on the Outdoor Recreation Advisory Committee that helped put this together. We're really excited to see what that final document is. I haven't had a chance to look at the final yet, but I'm really excited to dig into it and provide some comment. And I hope you all, I know Martha's going to mention this too, but please make sure you take a look at the draft SCORP and provide lots of comment. So with that, I'm going to turn it over. Oh, I didn't introduce myself. I am so sorry. I'm very neglectful. I'm Tricia Aspinwall. I work for the Nature Conservancy. I'm the land conservation manager there. I lead our protection work where we utilize a good bit of Green Acres funding as well as our donors funding to protect land in New Jersey, primarily focusing in Northwest New Jersey where we are today in what we call Bobcat Alley. The Nature Conservancy in New Jersey has protected over 60,000 acres in our time in the last, I think, about 50 years that we've been a chapter in New Jersey. And now that I have done that completely out of order, I would love to welcome Martha Sapp to the stage. Let's give her a round of applause.
Good morning, everyone, again. I have a dramatic introduction here. This is the SCORP. And listen. So I figured we could just sit here and read it page by page. No problem at all. No, this is the result of a long process that we'll talk about, and the input of a lot of people. We'll talk about them too. But it's true, we want to hear from everybody now. We're asking you, the public comment period is open for another 2 weeks. We want to hear from you. And I obviously cannot cover everything that's in there, so I want to kind of whet your appetite, tell you how we came about, how the SCORP came about, what went into it, what are some of the things we found out about from the public, and what we think is coming next and what we want to hear from you about. And that will make you want to run out tonight and start reading a copy of it. So how did we get here? As Trish said, it's a statewide comprehensive outdoor recreation plan, the SCORP. We've been doing it for a very long time. It used to be, the joke is, we used to have one person in the office who'd sit in his cubicle and write the whole thing. And that's not actually far from the truth. He did have public hearings and things, but not very many people participated. So it didn't change very often. And why do we need a SCORP? I mean, besides how it's a good idea to plan how you're going to prioritize your funding and your preservation work, it's also required by the National Park Service to stay eligible for Land and Water Conservation Fund money and some other funds as well. So it's an obligation that we do, but it's no problem. This year, sort of as a result of a change in organization within Green Acres, within the DEP, we put SCORP on steroids and decided that we would really do a big road show and really have a lot of community engagement. And so it turned out to be a much longer process than it ever had taken before, but the result is pretty impressive. Okay, so last year on Earth Day, we had a kickoff meeting, and it was up in Hudson County at Laurel Hill Park, and the Commissioner of DEP, who's standing in the middle, Sean LaTourette, announced this administrative order calling for the creation of the SCORP and calling for the creation of an advisory council. And then we had a period of time where we invited people to nominate others or themselves to be on the council, and came up with a really very impressive group. These people are, by the way, they're listed in order by first name. It just got too confusing any other way. But we had an amazing group from all over the state, representing all different kinds of interests, conservation, recreation, urban, suburban, I mean, equity, just everything that we can think of. Some were more vocal than others, as is the case. We had lots of meetings. They were all by Zoom, so lots of people had their hands up to contribute more than others. But it really, we got input from everybody in the creation of the document itself. I'm not going to go through these. This is sort of our goal. You know, let's do all this wonderful stuff. It's very important. This is what we kind of laid as the groundwork. But what we really wanted to find out from the Outside Together process was who we are as a state and where we are. Where do the people live in New Jersey? And how are we doing? We're going to ask them, but we're also going to look at the statistics to see how are we doing in terms of providing for recreation and conservation in New Jersey. So we did pulled together a lot of statistics, and this is just sort of showing the change in population from 2018 to 2022, and then projecting it out to 2024 and, 2034, and where we think people will be moving around. And this is by county. So it kind of gives you an idea of, we talked earlier today about the migration of people and where they're coming and going, because in order to plan, you need to know who your users will be. We also looked at density, population density, because again, in Green Acres, we put a lot of our funding into places that are densely populated when we're talking about recreation, especially. So we look at those numbers too. Again, we don't ignore the places that have low population density, because sometimes the population density is lower because the land is sensitive and it's not developable, and so we need to invest in those sensitive areas because, you know, nature is important. But again, all these trends were what we were looking at, and then also this is the how things have changed in terms of what areas have been developed more. I mean, development goes in fits and spurts, and as we said before, right now the biggest threat is warehouses. They're taking large chunks of land. One of the issues with warehouses is that they don't care if the land, I shouldn't say they don't care, it doesn't hinder their development if the land is contaminated. Whereas when we're buying land for preservation or recreation, we have to make sure it's safe and clean for the public to walk on. If they're going to pave it and put a large building on it, that's not a concern. And so sometimes those purchases can happen faster because they don't have to go through the cleanup process like we do. Then we're talking about different changes in agriculture and developed lands, where some of the biggest changes have been and where we see them, where the next change is going. And then at the bottom is how are we doing in terms of land preservation over the past few years. So again, we were trying to understand how we're doing in terms of preserving land, if we're doing it where the people are and where the people are going to be. A huge part of our process was a public survey, and I do have it here if anybody wants to look at it later. Actually, hopefully all of you took it, because we sent this information out. We invited people to apply. I think it went out to millions of people. We used so many different listservs, all different department listservs, and also all of the people who were on our advisory council, they sent it out to all of their people. We'd send it out in general public. We did press releases. We tried to get as many people to take the survey as we could, and over 15,000 people did. So it wasn't completely representative of the state, because a lot of the listservs that the Department of Environmental Protection has, yes, a lot of them are for people who care about environmental protection already. So I'll be showing you some snapshots of some of the answers that we got, and we divided them into what we call residents, the general public, and stakeholders. So the stakeholders are the ones who were more closely aligned, associated with the department and other preservation initiatives. So some of their answers were, they were sometimes more enthusiastic about certain things, because again, some of them, this is what they do for their living, or they're just, you know, if they're already in the hunting and fishing community or something, they have a lot of opinions about it. So again, this is representing the stakeholders, the people who took the survey itself, that we asked the same questions to everybody, but then we evaluated the answers differently because again, their perspective is a little different. But it kind of showed, this is sort of the distribution of where the respondents were from. And then one of our favorite questions was what takes away from recreation? What keeps you from recreating as much as you'd like to? And we were trying to see which one of these things were within our control. And obviously the second one for both groups was bugs, and we can do something about it, but not much. So, but again, understanding what they say are the obstacles to enjoying the outdoors was very important to us, so that we can find ways to resolve those issues. We had a very, very high, for both groups, for the residents and for the stakeholders, we had a very high satisfaction rate in their answers. They said that they're satisfied with the New Jersey's recreation and conservation, like 86%. So it is very high. Again, that could be skewed by the fact that these are the people who cared enough to spend the time to take the survey. So for that reason, we also had focus groups. So we had targeted focus groups in some urban areas to talk to people of African American background and Hispanic Latino background, and we had face-to-face focus group meetings with them in the evenings to try, because again, they're not always as easy to reach or as willing to participate, and so we really wanted to hear from the different communities in New Jersey. So we did have some special meetings with them to get their input as well. I mentioned before that our goal is to have everyone in New Jersey be within a quarter-mile walk. A quarter-mile, a 10-minute walk, it depends on how quickly you walk. Some people say that's a 10-minute walk or a 5-minute walk. And this map, there are a lot of maps in the SCORP, which are sort of meaningless at this scale. I mean, you have to really look at them. You can zoom in on them when you look at the SCORP itself. But there are a lot of people who are not within a quarter-mile. And a lot of the questions that we asked people were, and you'll see later, how do you get to the land? When you're recreating, when you're going out and enjoying the outdoors, how do you get there? And the predominant way is by car. And they have to travel a ways to do it. So we're trying to bring the parks to where the people are and put the parks places so that people can get to other places and other parks. Sort of a summary, this is kind of what they said they want. In parks, it's funny, farmers markets came up over and over again. They wanted lots more programming in the parks, cultural events, and that's another thing. They wanted us to be more culturally sensitive, so that in certain areas of the state there are different populations, and the parks that are in those neighborhoods should provide the kind of programming that is appropriate for the people who live there. And these are all the things that we want to be able to share with all of our partners, so that you know what the public is saying as well. They talk about not having enough information about what's actually out there, so they would love a centralized location of where all of the parks and open spaces are in New Jersey and how to access them. I think all of the different groups, we have our own sources, our own lists, but they would really like it to be sort of in one easy place. They'd like better transportation options. I mentioned before that I was traveling in Europe, and the train system is amazing there. It's kind of made me very jealous, because we were in this one town, and we got on the train, and there were people on the train with boogie boards and actually, they looked like kegs, but I'm not sure if that's what they were. But they were all taking a quick train ride over to the lake, because they could, so they didn't have to drive in their cars and cause more traffic. So there are lessons we can learn from even other countries about how we can retrofit maybe some of our own what we offer. Reduce park entry fees. That's a big one. But I think for the last 2 years, the state has waived all park fees for the state parks, which has been very popular. Not necessarily with the State Park Service when they first heard about it, but it all worked out in the end. And again, here are the obstacles. The changing needs is a big one. As the face of a town, as the people change, their needs change. So that's why rehabilitating and renovating parks is important as the the users change. So we set, when we created the SCORP, we set 6 principles, and I'm going to go through them very quickly, but this is sort of across the board. A lot of the issues that we've been hearing about, we wanted to focus in on them and ask the public about the questions. The questions from the survey were based on these subjects that we came up with as the principles that we wanted to go through. So the first one is expanding high-quality open space and recreational opportunities for all New Jersey residents and visitors. I mean, that's pretty much the SCORP. I mean, that's really what we all are in this field for, that we want there to be enough for the people. And the question is why? It's because it's our right. We want parks everywhere for everyone. So one of the things that we did in the SCORP is for every principle, we came up with a list of modeled behaviors. And these are examples of people, of organizations who have done something right in this realm, so that people could read about them and maybe see if that it inspires them to come up with solutions or similar successes, possibilities in their own areas. So these model behaviors, we try to get them from all over the state. I just randomly picked some. I mentioned before, for the Parks for Everyone, I mentioned before it's now just called the Greenway, formerly known as the Essex Hudson Greenway. Huge undertaking, very expensive, but it's connecting, it's in the backyards of over a million people in New Jersey. So again, we're trying to, it's a multimodal transport thing, because we understand that people want to ride their bikes and maybe use those scooters. I don't recommend scooters personally, but that was just user error, sorry. But we want to get the people parks into people's backyards. Accessible parks, we talked about that earlier. We want to make sure that no matter what your ability, you can use the parks. There are, again, other examples of parks where they went above and beyond what has been done to make the parks accessible in every meaning of the word to the public. And Jake's Law Inclusive Playgrounds, Green Acres did a special funding round this past year to incentivize counties to build inclusive playgrounds, now that this Jake's Law, now that the regs are out about what an inclusive playground means. And it's not just for people with physical handicaps. Some of these parks that are listed as model behaviors are for people with sensory issues and sight and other things. So there are very passionate people out there who are advocating for these kinds of special parks, and we want to hear about them and share the information so that others can learn from them. And again, each principle in the SCORP has goals and actions, because putting this stuff on paper doesn't mean anything if you don't do anything about it. So we have challenged ourselves, and this is just a couple. Each one probably has 20 or more goals and actions. We're challenging ourselves and you to take the next step, do what needs to be done, do the hard work, continue to do the hard work to make these things a success. I just put this. I've actually never seen now I'm actually drawing a blank on what cricket, thank you. I was going to say cribbage, that's not right. But we'll find in certain areas they apply to Green Acres for cricket courses, and then that's how you kind of learn some of the cultural needs in the different communities. This is what I was saying before. How do you typically get to the parks? And look at that. The vast majority drive themselves. Some walk. We want to make more walking and biking and all those things. Hardly anybody took public transport, and that's a shame. And again, we have similar answers from the residents, as we call them. How long do you usually drive to get to the places you want to recreate? I mean, 15 minutes to 30 minutes, that's not in your backyard. So again, we want to learn about all these things so that we can see where the deficits are and put more parks where the people are. So principle 2 was about climate change. I mean, if you saw the news yesterday, I mean, the flooding in New York and North Jersey, it's happening all the time. So we need to take it seriously. If you're here, I know you take this seriously, but we need to focus on this when we're doing acquisition and park development, and make sure that the parks that we build are sustainable and they're taking into account the future impacts of climate change and the current impacts. And the why is because it's real. So, despite what we sometimes hear on the internet, it's real and it's here. So there are so many things that we can do to to mitigate the impacts of climate change. So some of the modeled behaviors are some of the urban parks that we're doing with to combat the heat island effect. As Jay was saying, I guess he was saying earlier that the trees in urban areas are critically important. I mean, we've seen the science. I mean, the cities are literally hotter because they're completely paved. So the more parks that we can put in the more trees we can put into the parks that we fund, we encourage that, and we've actually just started outright for prohibiting tree removal. We used to sort of leave it up to the towns, and now we're saying we can't really do that anymore. We have to be more strict about it. Splash pads, other green infrastructure, we've certainly broadened our definition of what is allowable, what's conservation in a park. And Blue Acres, one of the things, Blue Acres has been very, very successful. I mean, it's been around for a long time, but it kind of went on steroids after Superstorm Sandy, and now it's a sustained, rather, funding program that we're really working on, getting a lot of federal funds to do it, and there's has always been a set aside in the funding that comes to Green Acres. Some of it's for Blue Acres. And renewable energy, we are putting more and more EV charging stations in parks, and we need to educate the people to let them know that the EV charging stations are there, because I know a lot of people say that the challenge to buying an electric vehicle is where can you charge? How far can I go without that? So we're putting more and more in parks. And again, some of these goals and actions seem like duh, but they're not always what people have in mind when they're planning for their open space and parks. Principle 3, so ecotourism. Last year, they reorganized the department, the DEP, and Green Acres program was moved into a new program called Community Investment and Economic Revitalization. And a lot of people raised their eyebrows, and they're like, why is the Department of Environmental Protection worried about economic revitalization? It's not an either or. I mean, it certainly does not have to be. So ecotourism is a perfect example. Millions and millions, hundreds of millions of dollars are spent in New Jersey every year because of, say, just birding, just as one thing. But the number of cultural resources that we have here are incredible, and people want to go there, want to come here to see those things. And so we can use that. The kind of investment in our communities can change things. So someone mentioned before, in the last session I was in, they mentioned the payment in lieu of taxes program, which is where the state is supposed to, not Green Acres, but the state is supposed to offset the property taxes that are lost to municipalities when land is preserved in their towns. And it's sort of been stagnant for a while. And that hurts. I know that's an impact for municipalities. But we all need to put our heads together and figure out ways to make open space and recreation be a driver in terms of bringing in more revenues and more economic revitalization for the towns. So I put this word in here just to challenge myself to say it, the semi-quincentennial, which is coming up, and New Jersey is really gearing up for this 250th anniversary of the signing of the Declaration of Independence by looking at a lot of the historic sites in the state, and investing in those because we expect there to be a lot more visitation. Again, bring the people in, they spend money on food and lodging and all those other things. There's a trickle-down effect. There's the Highlands plan, we looked at that for ways that, again, the Highlands region, which is very unique, how can it use its uniqueness to drive more investment in the right way? Again, I mentioned the birding. So, again, we all have to put our heads together. You know, there are other departments in the state and other organizations, EDA, other things that are focused, travel and tourism is focused on this too. We all have to work together. But the land can be just, it's such a resource in all the different ways that we can enjoy it and use it. it's not mercenary to say we can make money on it too, and then reinvest that. We talked before about stewardship being one of the most underfunded things, one of the biggest challenges we have. These are all ways that we can help bring more money into New Jersey to reinvest. That picture, I didn't put that there just because I like seeing my name on that sign, which is kind of cool. But that's a Green Acres construction sign. It means that we're doing a park development there. If you look behind it, that's Patterson Great Falls, which is, if you have not been there, it's incredible. But we're doing some investment there in terms of, putting a plaza and other things to bring more people there. Again, to spend more money in Patterson, which is one of the poorest cities. It's all cyclical. But also, for all the funding that Green Acres gives out, it creates more business. I mean, we have appraisers and surveyors for park construction projects. There's contractors and engineers, and so we actually drive investment just by doing the parks that we're doing. So there's a lot of good out there. So when we asked people how they spent their money, this is kind of what they told us. These are the things that they spent the most money on when they spent money. And we're just, again, learning from these. I put this for stakeholders, park passes, campsites. The general public, maybe if they're not buying the fishing licenses and all those things, they wouldn't report that as one of the highest ones. But again, we're learning a lot from all these things. The next principle was about technology. And it's not the enemy. I put in here, the future is here and it has a screen. I mean, you can't go outside anywhere when people aren't looking down at their phones. But sometimes they're looking down at their phones to learn about where they are. And social media is the #1 way that people really are finding out about what to do. I use my phone to figure out how to get here today. I use my phone to figure out how to get to the parks I want to get to. It's here. There are so many apps that are out there. Some are, trail apps especially, some are crowdsourced and can be very helpful, but not necessarily reliable. And then there are other apps that are more monitored. The DEP has a fantastic trail app, and we're working with other groups too, to have information be readily available, but that's accurate too. Last year, I did some bad recreating because I kind of believed, I took the word of the people who were saying that the trail I was on was easy, and it was not. So, I mean, again, you really want to, you do your research, but now we do our research on the computer, on our phones. So, again, we want to keep people informed. We said before, one of the obstacles is people don't know what's out there, so we have to find ways that they'll use to find out what's out there. Oh, I'm sorry. Why are there birds there? Because eagle cams. Who doesn't love an eagle cam? But this is new technology that we didn't have years ago. People love that. I've gone into restaurants where they have the Duke Farm eagle cam up on their screen. It's just, people just think it's so cool. So again, this is how people are finding out about information. We asked them, how do you find out about the places you want to go? And this is what they told us. So, the word of mouth thing is big, but social media, all different types of social media are really lead the list. Same thing for stakeholders, not the different. I don't think the rankings were very different. But again, all this information is in the SCORP. You're not going to be able to absorb all this just by glancing at it. I just want you to understand that we asked a wide variety of questions because we need to know what the public is thinking and how we can do better to help them. Furthering equity and environmental justice. We talked a lot about that this morning. This is a very high priority, and the reason is because it's the right thing to do. We have, one of the model behaviors that we listed was the Kramer Hill Waterfront Park in Camden. It was an improperly closed landfill, and the residents around there that were mostly Hispanic and low income, they had no option. They lived there, and they lived near this continually contaminating source. So a lot of money was spent over the last few years, a lot by our Office of Natural Resource Restoration to go in there and properly close it and transform it into an amazing park. And I mentioned earlier the youth inclusion program. Actually, I'm going to mention that next. There's a lot of fishing that happens right off of that Kramer Hill Park, And some of the kids from Camden had never been fishing before. A lot of the kids we took down there had never been fishing. They had never been to that part of the waterfront before because it was not accessible. So what we do is, again, it's transformative. I think it was earlier, Jay mentioned that this Cohansik Nature Reserve, we were able to fund a project recently where the New Jersey Conservation Foundation and the Nature Conservancy worked with the Native American Advancement Corporation, and they after the land was preserved, they transferred the land back to the Native Americans. I mean, I went to an event, it was very moving because we actually were returning it to its original, not owners, but stewards, because they feel very strongly about their connection to the land and the honor that it is to steward it, the land that's entrusted to all of us. Again, there are a lot of challenges, a lot of actions and goals that we have about listening to the people and finding out how they feel about how they've been treated with respect or disrespect in different aspects of life, and seeing if maybe our work together can help balance out those the unfair burdens they've been under. Again, I mentioned youth inclusion before. We brought in probably about 60 kids from different cities and introduced them to stream monitoring and historic sites, and taking them out into the water. I mean, it wasn't all just fun and games, but a lot of them at the end of the 6-week period, they decided that they wanted to pursue this as a goal. As a career. They didn't even know these careers existed. And again, we wanted them to think about a future in the field, but also just know that they are stewards of the land, and we need them to care and to tell their friends that this is a reason to care. Stewardship. This is the last one we talked about before. It's the biggest nut to crack, because this is what happens once you buy the land and once you build the park. This is the in perpetuity part, taking care of it. And there is, New Jersey is so diverse. We were joking before, Trish and I, that we came from the flatlands down in Burlington County up to the hills. It's just, every part of New Jersey is different, and there's so much to protect and to be in awe of. We have a diverse population of people and plants and animals. So we have to learn. We continue to learn more about that and why it's so important, what the interrelationship is that is so important that we should protect it. So Green Acres gives out stewardship grants. Somebody asked me before about the definition of stewardship, and that is something that's very important. There's a difference between stewardship and maintenance, and we have to sort of thread that needle, because we could spend every penny we have on maintenance. Stewardship has it's beyond the normal operation and maintenance. It's the restoration, rehabilitation. It's the removing invasive species. It's the restoring the wetlands. It's the trying to get nature back to the way nature is supposed to be. And that's kind of, and how to get it into a place where it can then be sustained and maintained properly. So again, there are a lot of, I love these names though, these things, the PRISM and conservation dogs and the invasive species strike team. I love how we all get, put our energy into cool names. But again, there are a lot of really good examples of organizations around New Jersey that are taking this seriously and have had successes, and we can all learn from those. So those are in the SCORP for you to look at and, again, be inspired by. People care about nature. I mean, everybody, when we asked them how important it was to them, how important was open space and recreation and where we should spend our money, they told us to, number 2 is protect wildlife and plant habitats. I mean, you wouldn't think that everyone's thinking about that when they have other problems in their lives, but they care very much, passionately. And then we talk about the future. I mean, what's next? This happens to be 3 kids of someone who works in Green Acres, so it felt good. That's one of the benefits of being on the working so hard on this. I could let these kids know that what they're so excited about just because their mom works there is something that they have to continue on for the rest of their lives. And we're trying to get to these kids. The more we can get into schools, this is a sidebar, the more we can get into schools and even introduce all these ideas to the kids, the better we are. That's just my editorial comment. And funding opportunities, the SCORP lists a lot of places where you can get money besides Green Acres. I mean, we're not the only game in town. Again, over $350 million a year is being raised by municipalities and counties with their open space taxes. But then we also list a lot of other departments. I mean, the Department of Community Affairs a couple of years ago started local recreation improvement grants. It's sort of competition for the Green Acres program, our park development grants, but we don't see it as competition. We send people there too. Get money from everywhere. Go for it. That money comes out of the budget, and it went from $5 million to, I think last year they got $20 million. Now their funding can also go to school boards where ours can't. But we are all in favor of anywhere we can get money. So there are more parks and more preserved open spaces. So again, the SCORP lists a lot of different places that are not necessarily things that you'd think about right away. So this is a resource for everyone to pursue this funding. And the takeaways: we are not going to have success in anything if it's not community driven. If there's no investment in it by the public, we won't succeed. It'll be a constant battle. But they want to be, we're all on the same side. They want to be asked. They appreciate being asked. When I was talking to the kids from the youth inclusion, and we were telling them they have a voice, and they didn't think that anybody cared what they had to say, and we do. We assured them that we do, and they need to have that kind of they need to have that kind of courage. It takes a lot of courage from everybody. We need to collaborate. I mean, events like this. The conversations that are happening in the hallways are, can I give you a call about this issue? Can I ask you about that? That's so great. Keep doing that. And the connections, again, we're trying to connect to each other. We're trying to connect to the land. That's what it's all about. I mean, nobody's living in a, what is it, no man is an island? Although islands are pretty fun. We need to talk to each other and we need to work together. So we need to hear from you. We need you to spread the word, if you can, to your user groups to say, read the SCORP. 300 pages of it is, I mean, most of the SCORP are the answers to the survey questions, and lots of maps in there too. There's probably about 100 pages with lots of pretty pictures, so it's really not that long a read. But we want you to look at it. We want you to see where, what you think. Is there something that we missed? Do you have other ideas that we can add to this, to add as modeled behavior? Because again, people, a lot of times, when we ask an applicant for something, they say, do you have a sample of that? Whatever it is. What do you mean by that? When we started really pushing community engagement as part of our application process, people are saying, well, what do you mean? How do you define that? And we said that here's a laundry list. Here's how Perth Amboy did it. They did surveys. Here's somebody else put a sign in the park. This is what's coming. There are so many different ways, but people want and need examples. So again, that's why we thought the modeled behavior was a good approach to show some successes and inspire people. Maybe it won't work quite that way for you, but maybe how about this? So we need to hear from you. The public comment period ends on October 18th, and here's the address, or there's a place where you can add your, where you can log in and put your comments, and we really, really do want to hear from you. Even if it's just to say great job, that wouldn't be bad. So the history, and then the last thing is thank you. And now I'd love to open it up for questions. I have no idea if I went too fast or too slowly, so whatever, if you have any questions, and it could be off topic too, I'm happy to answer.
Thank you so much, Martha. That was an incredible presentation, and I know I'm really excited to, now having seen that highlight, it's really bright up here.
It's really bright up here.
I'm really excited to dig into the SCORP and see the final version and give some comments myself.
Just so you know, so we take public comment period, have the public comment period, take the comments, summarize them, make any changes we need to, and then we'll be creating the final version and submitting that to the National Park Service before the end of this year. Great. Questions?
I thought I'd start off with a question myself, and then I'll facilitate some more questions.
Trish was on the advisory council, like I said, and she was very, it's nice not to be shy, so please dive in.
And usually I am shy, so this is me being out of character. But obviously I work in land protection, and we're very grateful for Green Acres funding, and we're very dependent on the state to employ our strategies for, protecting land in New Jersey. And we have obviously both a traditional conservation program as well as a cities program, so we recognize the importance of doing both. So my question is, seeing that in terms of land protection, both addressing the park deficit and habitat connectivity are both really important goals of the SCORP. How is the state going to balance those two and find a way to address both?
By having these kinds of conversations, because, we have, Green Acres buys land for the state. We don't own land ourselves. Generally, almost every acre of land we buy is managed by the Division of Parks and Forestry and Historic Sites, or the Division of Fish and Wildlife, or the Natural Lands Trust. They all have they each have very different missions. And so we're actually buying land that meets all their different missions. And so for the Natural Lands Trust, it's literally in the name. They're just buying things for natural lands to keep in its natural state, to protect habitat. We don't prohibit access to those sites, but we don't necessarily advertise them, because again, usually it's because there's some endangered species or very special sensitive areas there. That said, we also have to, we buy land for parks and forestry, and those lands, we have the forestry program, they're passionate about trees, and so we are talking about forested land, forest stewardship. The parks side of it, that literally they are there for recreation for the public. So that's even in one group. They have very different goals. And fish and wildlife, it's habitat. Now there is a recreation component in fishing and hunting and other things, but again, they care very much about the habitat for those plants and for those animals and fish and things. So again, it's natural resource that helps for the recreation resource. So the department, our own mission is so varied, and we're not in competition with each other either. We do have a lot of funding, and we're pursuing only land from willing sellers. So a lot of it, we need you to see which lands are important in your neck of the woods, and see if the landowner will submit an application to Green Acres to sell to us. It does not obligate them to sell it to us. It does not obligate us to buy it, but we're not even going to evaluate it if we don't know that the owner is willing to sell. We do not condemn land. So we need to hear from everybody else who has also evaluated where the connectivity needs to be, where all these different gaps are, and then we'll figure out which funding source is best. Should it be something that the municipality takes on and applies to us for, or should it be something that we buy for the state itself? So you tell us.
Thank you so much. That's a fantastic answer. And I'll be in touch with some of our priorities and our partners' priorities. So who would like to ask the next question? And I'm happy to pass the microphone here, or I think Christine has one too.
Hi, thank you. I'm Amy Hansen with New Jersey Conservation Foundation, and this is kind of an aside, but I'm wondering about the timing on the Green Acres rule changes.
Okay. So Green Acres rules, these are the rules that dictate that regulate the funding programs, the grants to municipalities, counties, and nonprofits, and it's long overdue. The problem is it is an enormous endeavor. That said, we are trying to start by the end of the SCORP sort of pushed back a little bit, because the first thing we will do for the rule rewrite is do stakeholdering. We want, it's such a jargony word, isn't it? We want to talk to the public, to our users, especially to our applicants, find out, how should we change? We are open to changing. We know there are ways that we need to improve. There are things in the rules that hamper us, but they were needed way back when, and we understood why, but things have changed. So we do not take it personally. I would joke before because Jay Watson was doing a presentation, and in the description it said something about how Green Acres, we can make Green Acres get better or something like that, and he said, I didn't write that. I said, but it's okay. We want to hear how we can do the work better. Green Acres is filled with passionate people, and they get tired of the bureaucracy too. They get frustrated. So if we can find ways to protect our investments, to make sure we're spending money on, spending the right amount of money, spending it in the right places, making sure the land is used for the way it's supposed to be used. If we can figure out a way to do that easier, we'd love to. We are hampered a bit by the statutes in some cases, but those get changed too. So hopefully by the end of this year, we'll start having probably small group meetings and then larger group meetings and hearing from people. But you can start now. You can start literally, the day the rules were adopted 100 years ago, I started with Post-it notes about where it needed to change. And right away, we found things that we should have done that. But at the very end, when someone makes a substantive change, a substantive suggestion, you can't change the rules at that time. It's too late. So we said, okay, next time. So start now. Go through the rules. Tell us what you like, don't like, suggestions for ways to do it better. We'd love to hear it.
Hello, Peter Dolan from the New York, New Jersey Trail Conference. Sorry, Martha, I always have something to ask.
Sure.
So it's fantastic to have guidance in the form of this document on statewide priorities and goals, and then to translate that into actionable items is going to require local planning. Every park's needs are different, the users are different, the facilities are going to be different. So one thing I'm sure you know from this process, it's very time consuming. I'm sure there was a price tag that was associated with this final document. So in order to make sure that the outcomes are intentional and well thought out on a local implementation level, what resources are available for park level planning with superintendents so that each park has a plan to implement these goals and strategies in a way appropriate to them?
Well, one of the good things about this process was that it was not a Green Acres process. It was a DEP effort. So the assistant commissioners for Parks, Forest, and Historic Sites and for Fish and Wildlife were, in every meeting, they were very much part of the process because they have their own challenges, and those challenges have to be woven into with the direction that the whole department, the whole state takes. So this includes challenges that the state faces, not just our partners. So this was our way of complaining or brainstorming for ourselves as well. So yes, you're right. So I guess I'd have to say that the assistant commissioners, as part of this process, have been thinking that through about how the different parks need different attention. I can't answer about how the superintendents, but they were all. This was shared with all DEP employees too, and they could put in their suggestions. So I'm not sure how they're going to roll it out and have it trickle down to the different superintendents, but hopefully they'll use this and figure out how it works best for them. I'm not sure if I can answer that because that's a parks. If you mean how Division of Parks and Forestry is going to use this.
Yeah. So I know, for example, in New York State, we're working with Harriman State Park on a trail plan for Harriman, and a lot of the goals are very similar to those identified in the SCORP, which is not just accessibility and public transit access, but where is there a mismatch between this is a trailhead that is designed or located to greet new visitors, but the trail conditions don't actually, result in an enjoyable experience for people at that experience level. So there's a lot of work that goes into making sure that the recommendations in a large plan are reflected in a park-specific plan. And currently, to my knowledge, I haven't seen resources or funding in which planning is an appropriate use of the funds. So I guess my question is, how do we produce the plans that the superintendents need to make sure that they have actionable items that are actually something that they can start working on? So no need to go into, I know it's...
No, I think that would be a perfect comment to make in your comments, because this is a DEP document, and the commissioner is the one with the assistant commissioners who would then say, okay, now we have to walk the walk. You know, we've learned from ourselves and from the public what they need, and that planning is important, and now we have to take the next step. Because our commissioner said he didn't want this to be, I mean, one of the plans that sits on the shelf, which doesn't mean anything anymore because we don't print these to put on your shelves. But it can't just be a static document that wasn't that fun for a year and a half to work on that. So I think that is exactly the kind of comment that we need to say, ask the question, what is the next step? How are you going to use this on the ground?
Perfect. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Martha. Great presentation. So I used to do this at the federal level with the Forest Service and the Park Service, and one of the things we always ran into problems with was the Forest Service kind of did their thing and the Park Service did their thing, and then we tried to talk to the states who wanted to do their own thing. There are a lot of resources that are available. There's a lot of land out there. I live in North Jersey now, so I know the Highlands area pretty well. And for example, Wawayanda State Park, which is right near me, is a traffic jam every weekend, summer long, because of probably lack of access to other areas, state-owned lands, lands that are managed by the Highlands Council. To what extent can this information be pulled together from the different sources? And I realize the SCORP serves a very specific purpose in qualifying for Park Service funding. But I'm just curious the extent to which this new information could be shared with the Highlands Council, which now has an RFP out to actually develop a conservation and I assume recreation plan, and other jurisdictions, to help these jurisdictions understand how recreation can benefit them, can benefit their economies, and how improved coordination between the different elements at the state level might enhance outdoor recreation experiences. Whether it involves transportation for people from urban areas, and we're not far from urban areas, or it involves developing better access to trails and resources for people in that community where those resources reside. And I think we have a lot of information, and having worked in government, as you do, oftentimes we all kind of work through our siloed strategies. But it seems to me, with all the information that's available now, with a very willing DP director, and I think the governor's office has made clear their interest in this, there may be a unique opportunity to pull these pieces together. In fact, I'd suggest, to Peter's point, maybe even more coordination with Harriman State Park and the New York State parks could enhance a recreation experience which people from New Jersey may be able to better access in northern New Jersey, even though it's in New York State. I'm just curious, if you were to step back, not just fulfill the role that you have to fulfill, but given your experience, years of experience, how can we do a better job of pulling all the information we have right now together to enhance recreation opportunities, the economies of these rural communities, and I think also improve the environment, particularly as we look at climate resilience and biodiversity conservation and the like?
Wow, okay. Well, it's funny that one of the things that the public said that one of their challenges and one of the things they wanted was a one-stop shopping kind of place. And so we've just been told that, so now is the part where we digest. And the truth is that, you know, we have a lot to digest here. This was a learning experience for those of us who were working on it, but we haven't shared it yet for people to then say, oh, okay, we need to work with this group and that group and talk to each other. My assistant commissioner, Elizabeth Dragon, this is, again, community investment and economic revitalization. She sits on the board of EDA and other groups that, again, people wouldn't necessarily think have to do with DEP. So this particular, our particular commissioner he always talks about busting silos, you know, And that's one of the reasons that he reorganized a lot of, we used to have a natural and historic resources group, parks, forestry, fish and wildlife, green acres, historic preservation. We were all in that group together. And about a year or so ago, that broke up because he was like, we shouldn't have a green side or a brown side of the department. That's what we used to joke, the green side and then the brown side was the regulatory side. He said, no, it's one department, because even people who are writing air permits care about the land, care about the world, care about the earth, they all care about the environment. So he's very much into that. So I think this is now our challenge to do exactly what you're saying. Use this information that we're just getting in and haven't even had a chance to absorb, and share it with our other departments so they see where the crossover is. Because again, travel and tourism, DCA, they have other programs. I mean, we found out from the budget last year that that DCA had a new parks program. We're like, what? People were calling us about it, and we had no idea what they were talking about. So I completely agree with you. We need there to be a lot more conversations, a lot more centralized information, and I know that my bosses are not going to let this just be a static process that's over. This is just the beginning. So we're challenging ourselves to do exactly what you said, because we know that's the only way forward.
Hi, I'm Alan Hunt. I'm the Director of Policy and Grants of the Musconetcong Watershed Association. We have a National Wild Scenic River designation. You probably drove part of the way along the Musconetcong River up here, and the lower Delaware is a wild scenic river too. And there's actually a lot of folks interested in doing more studies of wild scenic rivers. There's 5 in the state, and there's some other eligible segments. In the previous SCORPs, the wild scenic rivers were a greenway that was prioritized for acquisition of lands. And we were hoping on this SCORP that we could get considered for recreational enhancements, because a lot of the acquired lands don't have great access, they don't have signage. There could be some improvements made to stabilize the water access. And we will also work on the national level through the National Wild Scenic River Coalition, with the National Park Service staff at the Washington office, with the National Land and Water Conservation Fund, and we got guidance changes that wild scenic river areas are eligible for funding, that the study areas are eligible for LWCF funding, and that also dams can be removed so you can restore rivers to free-flowing conditions, which is what wild scenic rivers are all about. But in this draft, I don't see how that translates back into this, into what we've worked very hard on the national level to get in that national guidance. It does seem other states allow open competition for the LWCF funds. New Jersey doesn't. It goes in the Green Acres funds. So we're also not even sure how to apply to the Green Acres funds to access the LWCF if it's supposed to be bundled this way. So could you help unpack how these guidance areas for wild and scenic rivers and the LWCF guidance are being translated into the SCORP, and how we could move forward with an application to improve river access and protection on wild scenic river corridors? Thank you.
Sure. Well, one of the reasons, it's true, we do, the Land and Water Conservation Fund money comes to the states, and some states grant it out. Some states use it for themselves. We do a combination of the two. We don't have applicants apply to us for land and water money, but when they come to us, we put the money, sometimes we'll replace our grant with the land and water money, or we'll use the land and water money as the match required for the local grant. We also use the land and water money for the acquisitions that are eligible. So if there's a property that is and we do a lot along rivers and things, and it is a very high priority for us. You're right. I mean, we didn't call certain things out in here. It's more just because it was a different structure. The priorities are all still the same, because those things are, I guess they'd be found in the different principles. But you're right. It didn't mention that, and that would be something that you could talk about. Where do designations like that fall into this? They haven't lost priority at all. We talked about their importance just in a different way. And so again, in the listing of all of the federal funds, we also have to structure our applications to the National Park Service in ways that are eligible, on projects that they think are important. So the fact that you made them recognize how important wild and scenic rivers are will help us to be able to apply that funding, our funding, to those projects. So they'll still get done the same way, maybe even easier, because now the feds are more recognizing them. We're still, acquisition along water bodies and the buffers to those have always been incredibly high priority for us, because that's a finite resource. I mean, there's only so much that's waterfront. So the priority hasn't changed, hasn't gone down at all just because it wasn't called out in this SCORP. But I think it was just because we just structured it differently. But that's certainly something that you can comment on, and we can reassure you in writing that, that it's still a priority for us. In terms of access, and you mentioned earlier signage, things like that. So any land that Green Acres funds, no matter whether we buy it directly or whether we give funding to someone else, has to be open to the public. You can't block people from going to it. That said, we don't obligate everyone to immediately formalize the access. So sometimes you preserve land and people can get to it if they know it's there, but we're not forcing them to build a parking lot. That's a problem, but that we always say that comes later. First, let's preserve it. So as we said before, it's later now for a lot of these lands. And that's one of the reasons that buying easements is so problematic for us, because we'll buy an easement with a public access corridor, but now put the access in, because otherwise it looks like it's just somebody's private property, and they get used to having it be all preserved, and then suddenly they don't want people walking through it. Because maybe it's the next owner who bought it and like, what do you mean people are going to walk through my backyard? So that is a constant challenge that we have of letting the people know where the access is, what land is accessible to them. If you see a Green Acres sign, you can access it. It doesn't mean 24/7 in any way you want, but you can look into it because it's an obligation that it's open to the public. Anyone have additional questions?
John Landau, I guess citizen steward in Morris County, no big organization. Do you see a philosophical pivot towards investing in management and maintenance, planning, as gentleman mentioned, and just after the plans, maintaining the properties? It's like we buy a car, we have to have a budget for maintenance. We buy a house, we have to upgrade the kitchen, the bathroom every 20 years, whatever. We are starving our parks at all levels, municipal, county, and state. Are we going to fund that? And how?
Well, are you saying the planning part or the pivoting to actually fund?
You have to have the plans, and you have to actually implement the plans.
Yeah,
how to use this stuff, not just bank it. Because you can't bank a lot of lands in New Jersey. Some of them you put in a bank and they'll grow nicely. Most lands in New Jersey have been farmed before. They have to maintain these. They go to hell in a handbasket.
Mm-hmm. We have the exact same problem with our state lands.
I understand. So it's the whole series.
The whole state. And so it's funny because we tell applicants when they apply to us for grant funding, one of the questions in the application is, how much will the maintenance be annually for this property? So that we don't require them to set it aside, but we want them to understand you're taking on a responsibility and you're going to need to do that. They're signing a contract with us that this land will be maintained, although we don't define it. It doesn't mean that, and we're not telling them when they have to mow or that they don't have, whatever, that kind of level of direction. But we just want them to understand when they're buying it that they're taking on an obligation. Same thing for the state. We buy land all the time. Parks and Forestry is like, how are we going to take care of this? We have fewer people and less money, but the opportunity is now. So I completely understand your frustration. We feel the same way. We are doing the best we can, and this conversation continues. Now, I can't lobby anybody, but I know this conversation is happening with certain members of the legislature to try to figure out how to maybe fund this. But they're the ones who defined stewardship as something beyond, literally it says beyond routine operation and maintenance. So our question was, okay, but how do we take care of the routine operation and maintenance too? So we can do stewardship projects that, as long as they don't look like ordinary maintenance.
The public of New Jersey stepped up and said, let's do Green Acres because they wanted to protect the lands. Could we evolve that process to get the public to understand they need to maintain those lands as well as just buy them?
Well, again, the open space taxes, the legislation that authorized towns and counties to tax themselves for open space is for land acquisition, park development, farmland preservation, and maintenance of all those properties. So the towns have the ability, depending on how they structured their own question, they're making their own decision. And sometimes they have to go back to the public for another referendum to tweak what's allowable, but maintenance is one of the things on the list of things that they could use that for. So there is a way, it's just sometimes you have to prioritize, and we're in the same boat. You can do it all. I mean, you're allowed to do it all, you just don't necessarily have the money to do it all. So it's a question of priorities.
Well, I think we're at time. Is that correct? Yeah.
Yes, and it's
all.
lunchtime. So.
Yeah, it's
I'm not
definitely
standing
lunchtime.
between
I'm
anybody and lunch.
I'm sure you guys are all starving. Thank you, Martha, so much for a great presentation, and thank you all for a lively discussion and great questions. So let's all get lunch.
Okay, yes, have lunch.